So this is a project I've wanted to do for quite some time, and over the years I've tried doing it several different ways, and unfortunately the way you're about to see is the best way I could figure it out. But this is what it looks like all done, and all in all this was about 80 hours of work, so let's dive into the process. So the kit I'm going to be using is going to be Hobby Boss's 1-350th USS Greenville. I also picked up this 1-350th CH-53 from Orange Hobby. 3D printed, it's got two of them in here. I don't really have a use for the second one, but I'll hang on to it. I chose the CH-53 Vice and SH-60 just because I like the way the CH-53 looks, and this build is really about kind of what I want to do. I'm basing it off of these reference photos here. It's very similar to the box art. It's something that has kind of inspired me for a while, and it's really kind of something that I've always had in the back of my mind as a scene I've wanted to do, and I finally just buckled down and did it. And you'll understand why I say buckled down in just a second. This kit is pretty simple: 2 sprues, handful of parts. The hull comes in 2 halves, got some photo etch for the prop if you choose to use it, a few decals, and a stand for the ship. So this kit is kind of one of the better ones out there. There is one from, I think, Reich Models, if I'm saying that right. The hull's in 3 parts, and that's kind of not something I wanted to deal with. The 2 halves putting together like a clamshell is really straightforward, and in both instances, as you can see, the hull is bare. It's missing a detail for the 688i, the improved Los Angeles class. As you see here in these reference photos, there's a very visible pattern on the hull, and all of the plastic offerings are missing this. And this is really what I struggled the most with, recreating this pattern, recreating this texture, because I'm gonna build the sub on the surface with a helicopter hovering over. It's gonna be a very dynamic scene, and I wanted to make sure that I captured the sub perfectly. Well, as perfect as I can get it anyway. I tried doing this years ago with scribing tools, and I just couldn't get consistent enough. So I came up with a jig that you'll see here in a few moments to kind of go through and cut them out of strip styrene. And despite the modifications that I'm going to make, this kit is really straightforward. There's a couple things you need to pay attention to, like cutting the plastic for the rudder, or I should say the rear diving planes, and then the bow planes. That's kind of the only thing. And then if you are going to add the submersible, make sure you drill those holes. But outside of that, it's really easy to just slap the halves of the hull together. They fit fairly nicely. Add some glue, add some filler putty, and Bob's your uncle. It's super quick to put this thing together, except what you're about to see. So this is what I resulted to using a bunch of little strip styrene rectangles that I cut out using this 0.01 by 0.08 evergreen strip. This is the jig I made, and there's 2 problems with this. Not only are the little rectangles too small, but there's no way for me to kind of register my hobby blade and put it in the same place each time. So each rectangle was different from the last, and you can see I just wasn't being careful cutting out each of the rectangles, so I would let my blade wiggle a little bit. I just wasn't registering it really. There was no way to force me to register it, so I was just kind of mindlessly cutting because I was doing one at a time. So I tossed that, and then I made version 2 of the jig, so now I can cut 4 strips at the same time, which results in 4 little rectangles at the same time. And I actually had to redo it because the way I did the stop that set the length of each of the little rectangles was a little bit flawed. And you can see, if you look very closely, there's more space at the bottom than there is at the top. So that stop is crooked, and each of the 4 rectangles would be a different size. So I cut that off, binned it, and rebuilt it. So now I have a nice stop, and the blade sets in the same place at each time. I've built up this nice beefy jig to cut all these little rectangles, and from here on out it's just a matter of placing this larger blade in here, and there's no real room for the blade to wiggle around. There's a little bit, and that kind of caused me headache later, you'll see, but this is much more reliable, and I get very consistent. And now each time I cut, I get 4 that are roughly the same size, close enough within what I care about, basically. So it results in rectangles that look like this, a whole bunch of them. This is about enough for maybe 2 columns. So what I resulted to is I just cut a whole bunch out, and then I measured every single one, and I'm aiming for a 1.60, and I ended up using actually a lot of 1.68, and I blended that in. So the start of the boat is 1.68, and then it goes to 1.62, 1.64, 1.66, and 1.68 eventually, and then it tapers back down just because I didn't want to sit there cutting forever until I had enough of 1.60. The second thing I did was I used this shim stock to make sure my spacing between all of the columns is the same. So that way it's a uniform gap and it helps keep those columns straight too. So I can use registers on things like parting lines and stuff on the hull. And then I can just work my way down, and using one kind of perfect straight around column, I can use that shim stock to work my way backwards and get perfectly straight so they line up from one side to the other and there's no twist in each of the columns. Now it's just a matter of working all the way down and getting them all done. And here's a real time of what the sorting process looked like. I did about 10,000 of these little rectangles, I think. So you get an appreciation for kind of how long this took. And then putting them on is super simple. It's just some Tamiya extra thin. I drop a little dot of it where I need the rectangle to be, and then I grab one using my tweezers out of the sorted and labeled well, and I just rinse and repeat all the way down. I'll come back through later and get all of the half-size rectangles and all of the weirder size rectangles for working around some of the features on the hull, but right now I'm just focused on getting the majority of it done. So I originally cut about 8,000 or so rectangles, and I realized that wasn't enough, so I cut another 2-ish thousand, and it means I had to sort them all again. Well, sort that new 2,000, so it just added some more time. And then after that second round of measuring, I was able to get all the full-size rectangles in there, and now it's just time to go through and do all the weird odd sizes. It's not perfect. There's some areas that I wish I had done a little bit better. There was a little bit of an initial twist to them, so I had to make that up for some weird-sized ones, but now it's time to do around the torpedo shutter doors, and then a bunch of little half rectangles up top, as you can see, like I've already started here. And then I added a little bit of an area of damage because based on some reference photos, these do flake off every now and then. I've got the areas back around here, and it's just a matter of coming through and doing all these wonky sized ones to get the square and around the torpedo shutter doors and around the whatever these little grates are up front here. Like I said, it's not perfect, but basically everything from the waterline down isn't going to be seen, and everything from the waterline up is, I think, pretty perfect. So very happy with how this worked out. The process for doing all these little tiny ones is just looking at the gap that I have, cutting one of the full-size rectangles to match that gap, checking it, and if it doesn't match, I will go through and see if it matches any of the other gaps I have. That way I'm not wasting any styrene that I could have otherwise used. But it's a pretty time-intensive process, so I'll let you kind of get an appreciation for that here. And this is sort of why I dubbed this, at least to myself, Project Insanity, because I don't think I'm ever going to do this again. And with all of the odd little sized rectangles done, it is time to finish this up with the rudder, which I've already started. But after that, this will be done and ready to move on to paint. For the rudder, I'm using ones that are 1.54. I know they're supposed to be probably a little bit smaller than that, but I couldn't really find any good reference pictures of the rudder, so I just kind of swagged it to the best of my ability. They're a little larger than I wish, but at this point it's really just for looks. It's not perfect. I also made new zincs, those little white bars that you could see, and I went through and dimpled them with a rivet tool to give them the bolt heads. And then to get the rectangles meeting this non-slip texture up here a little bit better, I took my scribing tool, this UMM Scriber 1, at an angle, and I just pushed it along to kind of break that hard square edge of all the little rectangles. Just ran it through like this pretty much. I think it worked out well. In hindsight, maybe I would have tapered this a little bit differently, but I think it gets the job done and it looks like reference photos. So it's just a matter of finishing up the rudder here, and it'll be time for paint soon enough. Well, that's it for assembly on this one. It's time to get this into paint, which will be the next video. So make sure you subscribe, that way you don't miss out on seeing the whole painting process for this, along with the weathering process, of course, and then building the base for this. I hope you enjoyed watching the assembly process from the aspect of you don't have to do this, you get to watch me suffer through doing all of this build. Towards the end, I actually did kind of enjoy it, and I think that's just because I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. This was definitely a daunting project, and you'll see when I go to build the base for this that a lot of that work's going to cover it up, but I think it's worthwhile to have it complete, so that way I know in my head it is how it's supposed to be. So I will see you all in the next one. Take care.